Good afternoon from Baltimore. This is Alastair Williamson. We're going to talk a little bit about Baltimore. I think it's underreported heading into the summertime. And as you've seen, we've had a bunch of articles come out on Zero Hedge talking about Baltimore. Some titled Baltimore City Life Narrative Starts to Crack, a Tore Down Homicide Lane. We're also looking at the Ferguson Effect, Baltimore Millennials' Worst Nightmare, and then we had another one. So about 5 articles we're talking about Baltimore and what is happening. And some of the items that is really happening in Baltimore is, and Michael Snyder summed it up very well, and he quoted us in here. That's awesome stuff there. But Baltimore has become a rotting, decaying war zone amid raging opioid epidemic. So we're seeing some of the most intense trends here in Baltimore when it comes to being #1 for the homicide rate, very high opioid deaths here, and parts of the city not just looking like a war zone, but being a war zone. And I've done a bunch of videos on YouTube. One of the videos that I did, and you can see it in there, is that Baltimore has called upon the ATF, FBI, and the federal government on helping retaining order or controlling the city. One of the items that I saw, I don't know if it was a federal government agency vehicle, but what I saw is a mobile police RV. It's like this 40-foot RV patrolling the streets with stadium lights around it. I mean, it's a very incredible view. But throughout these areas, there's one rhythm, one rhyme that I was able to pick up, and I did a great video up in Detroit. And the reason I can say rhyme and picking up on trends is because all these cities that are in decay have one big similarity, and it's that around the American high. So we're talking like the early to mid 1960s, and that was like kind of like the peak of America. Is that we started to see industry leave. And especially here in Baltimore, what many don't realize is that Baltimore had, the largest steel producer in the world. It was around Sparrows Point. It's called Bethlehem Steel, bigger than China. I mean, China didn't even have steel at that point, or something of that significance. But it was really due to internal management. And then not adapting to technology that China was able to price them out. And basically, what we saw was that I think maybe if it was early, it was like the 60s. We saw maybe like I don't know what the number was, but I think it was like 30,000 jobs, steel jobs here in the city. But by 2012, there was none. So we saw this like steady 40, 50 year decline, not just in the steel industry, but the communities around it. That's how that's how communities are built throughout the United States, is that the industry comes in and then the community is built around it. Now, I have an article here from the Washington Post, kind of going over that 16,000 vacant homes are here in Baltimore. And if you take a look at some of the drone videos I have, you'll be able to see that. And it is a sight to see. Now, the U.S. Census came out, and right here in the article, they were saying there could be as much as 48,000 vacant homes in the Baltimore region. That's 16% of Baltimore's housing stock. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. And some of the things that we're seeing is economic disparities here in Baltimore. So, for example, Maryland, we got to realize, is a very high income state. But the median wealth income of African Americans is about $33,800, compared to Caucasian being around $62,000. That's a major wealth inequality gap there. That's a major gap. For example, where I am here in Brewers Hill, I go a mile away, and you're looking at row homes that are maybe 75,000, 100,000. But here, maybe an average of 375. I mean, some of the norms that I'm seeing on in this area is 500,000 for a row home. 5 to 750. You're seeing $1 million row homes all throughout here. But it's quite interesting that we see a very high income state, a wealth gap that is huge, and it goes to show you that the industry and jobs here for the population just aren't given to anyone or everyone. What's very interesting here is that we see the Ferguson Effect really starting to grab hold of the homicide rates roughly in about that 2014-15 time frame, especially it's about 15. And the Ferguson Effect is kind of like when all that unrest occurred that we saw in Ferguson, Missouri, and then you saw that focus. You saw that focus on police forces of police brutality, all that stuff we saw break out. A lot of the stuff that we saw, especially with community organizing groups like Black Lives Matter, a lot of that was paid by George Soros. Washington Post had an article, $100 million was given by Soros to the Black Lives Matter group. Now, I can say in Baltimore here, I would say the initial round of protests, or I would say the initial round of anger has been in Baltimore for decades upon decades upon decades, and it's grown. And the reason it's grown is at the American high, coming all the way down here. There was just a lot of industry leaving town, and opportunities were dwindling at a very record pace. But anyways, the Ferguson Effect here in Baltimore basically specifies that we're going to hit. We are right now in the deadliest per capita city in America, not just America, but in Baltimore's history. Now, this is at a time where Baltimore's population falls to a 100-year low. That's the census coming out. That is the census coming out. The first line here is Baltimore's population fell by more than 6,700 people in 12 months, ending the second half of 2016. Now, what's very interesting here is that Baltimore had like maybe close to 1 million at the American high, close to 1 million people here, and it was a very prosperous town. In the 40s and 50s. The American high is the mid 60s, and that's kind of where globalism started to take hold. So it's quite interesting that the narrative here in Maryland and Baltimore, and probably some towns neighboring here, is that gentrification in Baltimore is on the upswing, and a lot of that is due in part to Kevin Plank, Under Armour. Now, that's a great narrative, and it worked. I can tell you, it worked. My neighbor up north is Kevin Plank at Sagamore Farms, and what he's done there is phenomenal. But now I'm down here, and I look at some of the businesses that he's put money into, some of the communities that he's done. So you see the gentrification. You can physically see it, but you don't see it all over the city. Now, with hitting the 100-year low, with the crime getting out of control, with the mayor calling the feds to restore law and order, with the Baltimore riots, and crime spiraling out of control here, we're starting, and I wrote that article, we're starting to see it crack. We're starting to see that narrative for city life for millennials start to crack. Now, you hear that narrative of just millennials in droves are moving to cities and great. Well, that could be true in other cities, but is it necessarily true here in Baltimore? I didn't dissect, who exactly was leaving out of that out of that 6,700 people, and then out of just everybody else, taking that million population down to like 600,000 thereabouts. I didn't see exactly who was leaving or entering or whatever it happens to be. But what I can tell you is that you don't see an inflow here in Baltimore. You do not see an inflow, and that is very troublesome for that narrative that the mainstream creates for the millennials to, hey, move to the city. It's cracking. It's cracking in a very big way. So my point is here is that there's, look, the status quo is disintegrating at a very, very high pace right now. Before, from the mid American high, so the 60s, it was just a slow snowball, just starting to gain momentum. but especially in the 90s and 2000s, and currently where we are at in history, kind of, in that fourth turning, if we want to call it that, because we do see turmoil in our institutions, we do see turmoil socially, economically, and we see new forces who are trying to come in, and they're trying to dismantle the old institutions and rebuild new institutions. And it's figuratively. I would be very afraid if it was very literal. But look, some of these issues that we see in the status quo disintegrating. I'm going to read off a list here, and this is from Charles Hugh Smith of Two Minds blog. Some things he said is that, look, globalism. And that's the free flow of capital, labor arbitrage, nearly free money in central banks for financiers and corporations, pay to play, democracy, state-protected cartels, privatization gains, socialized losses, and a system stripped of self-correlating feedback accountability. So, some of that applies to here in Baltimore, and I would say the globalization definitely plays into that. I would say the free money of the central banks plays into that, because what you see is a lot of money being pumped into the Inner Harbor, Fells Point, and the communities that are surrounding the water, but you don't see a lot of that money pumping into the neighborhoods that really need the money, where the 48,000, according to the Census Bureau, where the 48,000 vacant homes sit. You don't see any money. I can't say any money, but you don't see enough money flowing into those areas. You can walk around into those areas, the areas where the highest of homicides are, and the industries. There are massive buildings where the industries are gone, totally gone. So it's I think we're entering an age of a lot of moral decay. Rising wealth inequality. I mentioned that here. If you look at the median wealth income from Caucasian to African American, it's nearly half. I mean, it's the African American population, their median wealth income is about 33,000 compared to Caucasian, which is about 66,000. So there's a lot of pissed off people in this neighborhood, but it never gets in the city, but it never really gets reported here. And I think we're really this is more in line of much larger cycles. Some of these very large debt cycles that we're seeing here, and I think that's why we're starting to see the system starting to crack, especially here in Baltimore. I really think Baltimore is a model to what happens as the end result of globalism. What happens not just to the industry, but what happens socially. Understanding, I think just understanding things in an economic sense is wonderful, but you also have to take in consideration, because the inputs into an economy is a lot of social, it's a lot of human capital, and we need to understand, what the health of the of those workers are. And it is not good, especially here in Baltimore. I mean, for example, Michael Snyder, reported on the opioid addiction, and it's very bad. I have a few individuals that I know who are fairly high up that run these opioid clinics here. They're nurses or a little high up, whatever you want to title them. And they are bounded by HIPAA, so I can't mention who they are. But what I can tell you is that they are very afraid of the trend, and this trend is new. It's a few years, and they're really talking about this new strain or new type of heroin that's really hitting the streets here. So is the end result of globalism just high homicide rates, decaying infrastructure, wealth inequality? An age of discord. I mean, these are the things that we're looking at here in Baltimore. I mean, that wealth gap is huge, so that's that wealth inequality, and the crime. I mean, there's just a whole multitude of things that I can't even list off here that is wrong with Baltimore. My point is, do we take that as a model and say, if we don't fix the system, or if we don't get rid of the old system and make way for the new? If we don't do that, it's coming to a town near you. It's coming to a town near you if we do not fix what Baltimore and the end result of Baltimore is. And I mentioned to you what is happening in Baltimore, and it's coming to a town near you if we don't fix what's wrong with the system, or if we don't let the normal credit cycles play out, the normal business cycles play out, and we continue to see this offshoring in our jobs. The industries are leaving. We see a mix match in skills. We see a demographic tidal wave, zero lower bound. All these things I'm mentioning. If we continue to see the status quo, what is occurring in Baltimore right now is going to come to a town near you. And to end this, it's basically the status quo is disintegrating. You got to recognize that we do see some major trends developing, and I especially say that I think the fourth turning could be deepening. This is a critical week of this political turmoil in D.C. And if that does occur, we could see a very interesting summer where the community organized groups band together and they create a very big campaign against trying to impeach Trump, and that's spilling over into the streets. So we see a very divided nation. We see a deepening fourth turning. The question is, do we have the ability to recognize the problem, and do we have the solutions to fix what has been plaguing our society for the past 50, 60 years?